Right, thanks, Buhle. Let's get straight into the lead. The Johannesburg High Court on Friday overturned the Metropolice Department's decision to prohibit a march by Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia. The march takes place today now to denounce the recent attacks against foreign nationals. To discuss their plans for the day, we're joined by KAAX Spokesperson Sharon Ekambaram. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Now, over the past months, activists from a broad coalition of civil society organizations have been wanting and preparing for this march. Your hopes were dashed, but that has since changed following the outcome of yesterday's judgment.
And we're very pleased and we welcome the judgment, and we, good over evil has triumphed. We also did march in the Western Cape on Human Rights Day, and today will be what we would have had on Human Rights Day, marching in Johannesburg to hand over a memorandum to the SAPS and to the Gauteng province as well.
And what will your memorandum contain?
It's, of course it is to denounce xenophobia in our country and to denounce the spreading of hatred and divisions and the spreading of myths and misinformation, and particularly the abuse that we see on social media. But more importantly, our march is to call on forces in South Africa to unite in our struggle to deal with poverty, to deal with unemployment. I just heard the minister speaking about finding syndicates and abuse of the vulnerability that people have without having documents, and the way in which that is abused by opportunistic forces. But I'd ask the minister to go.
Okay, we appear to have lost Sharon Ekambaram. She is speaking there on behalf of the KAAX movement, speaking about the anti-xenophobia march, which is set to take place today. And we will be trying to get back with her to continue this conversation, as she's also now speaking about the passport syndicate that Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi spoke to yesterday, but we will be trying to get her back in a short bit. Let's now turn our attention to this story. The Human Settlements Minister Mamoloko Kubai has approached the SIU to probe allegations of corruption and maladministration at the Housing Development Agency. Kubai addressed the media in Pretoria on Friday on housing policy amendments coming into effect on the 1st of April. Newzroom Afrika's Belani Pahadi was there and filed this report.
Minister Mamoloko Kubai says the Housing Development Agency has a culture of rumor-mongering, fictitious grievances, media leaks and unsubstantiated and frivolous whistleblowing that has taken root in its operations. Allegations of rampant corruption, maladministration and wrongdoing have emerged. Minister Kubai wants answers.
I have therefore decided that I will be approaching Special Investigation Unit to conduct an investigation in all our entities where there are claims of wrongdoing and corruption. We'll provide them with some of the documents that we have in the entirety of the portfolio, so that they are able to sift whether some of these issues, because they will have capability and the know-how of doing this without us interfering with the work, but not being distracted at the task at hand. I have said elsewhere that wrongdoing and corruption will be dealt with without fear or favor. And I encourage those with this evidence to be able to provide this evidence to us through the SIU.
Kubai also announced changes in her department taking effect in just a week's time.
From the 1st of April 2022, our housing programs will cost as follows. For a BNG, which people call RDP services and top structure, is moving to 196,887,000. Houses for persons with disabilities, you'd understand that this quantum has to be higher because the specifications have to be suitable for a person with disabilities. This goes to 209,071,000. Military veterans houses it's all around 240,000. And then for the FLISP market, it's around 147,000. Social housing moved to 187,000. We believe that with these amendments, we will be able to accelerate housing delivery and avoid projects being abandoned.
And in Olivenhout-Bosch, where thousands of government houses have been occupied without authorization, Kubai says her department was dealing with the issue to find lasting solutions and calls on residents to not illegally occupy government houses and, in hindsight, leave rightful beneficiaries without homes. For Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, I'm Belani Pachadi in Pretoria.
Right, let's take you back to the conversation that we have with our guest, KAAX Spokesperson Sharon Ekambaram, who is speaking now about the anti-xenophobia march, which is set to take place this morning by the Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia. The march takes place to denounce the recent attacks against foreign nationals. Sharon, thank you so much. We're glad to have you back. Before we got cut off, you were speaking, perhaps giving the Home Affairs Minister, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, some advice as he hailed the officials who busted that fake syndicate, the fake passport syndicate.
Yes, I was just making the point of how documentation disproportionately affects the poorest in our country. How a simple thing like a birth registration document it makes a difference between life and death of children, and whether a single parent, predominantly Black African woman, can access a social security grant to be able to buy food and ensure that their children survive, are able to get immunized, and what many rich people in our country, the tiny percentage who are rich, take advantage of. So this is what the march is about. It's to build in our communities solidarity, to fight poverty, not to fight each other. And that's not going to solve the problem. So it's a very loud call for things like a basic income grant and a significant amount for the most impoverished in our country. And the government has the power to enforce something like a wealth tax, so that the rich, many of whom got their wealth through the injustices of apartheid, and that there needs to be redress for that, and we haven't seen that in our country. So that's the march is to also looking forward to work with organizations like the South African Federation of Trade Unions and many NGOs and organizations in communities to make this call for solidarity and unity as we struggle for justice in our country.
Do you think, Sharon, that there is any form of justification at all for movements like Operation Dudula coming to the surface to speak about what their reality is on the ground when it comes to not being able to access jobs? Is there any substance to some of the arguments that have been put forward?
There is a lot of substance, and I've deliberately pointed to the fact that we are one of the most unequal societies in the world. We have systemic unemployment. Over 60% of young people are unemployed in our country, people who have got a degree and are walking the streets. But what I'm saying is that the means in which these things, they're not even movements. I question the opportunism of things like Operation Dudula. Whose interests are they serving? And those measures are not going to solve the problem of unemployment. We've had xenophobic violence since 2008. Stats SA will show you and demonstrate that the number of migrants in our country has been steadily decreasing. And yet we still, in fact, the poverty levels are increasing. Unemployment is increasing. So we've got to look and say, that's not the solution. And what is the solution? And are we playing into the hands of politicians who are very happy that we are blaming migrants so that we don't hold them to account when there's mismanagement, when there's corruption that is actually causing the poverty and starvation and unemployment in our country?
The tensions, the resurgence of the tensions have prompted government, at least the Labour Minister, Tula Singlesi, to speak out, saying now that South Africa now will be bringing into stream the National Labour Migration Policy, which speaks to a number of challenges, tackling those challenges, like the issue of jobs. He says that they're now going to be introducing quotas on the number of documented foreign nationals with work visas that can be employed across the various sectors like agriculture, hospitality and so forth. What do you make of that solution? Do you think that it will bring some form of change or perhaps even ease the tensions?
I think it's misdirected. I think the amount of energy and workforce that's going to be needed to enforce those laws is going to detract again from the dire need to focus on the crisis of unemployment, of the private sector shedding jobs that is contributing to the crisis. We have Clover, and Clover workers currently are struggling to keep their plants open so that jobs can be saved. The Labour Minister should be focusing attention on that, on dealing with the consequences of things like outsourcing, which is what is causing people to lose their jobs and lose their jobs for life. And these are jobs that have protection, like, access to medical aid, contractual employment, which is what we need in our country. And that's the problem. And the government needs to be putting in place measures to hold the private sector to make its contribution to transformation and redress in our country. That's the problem, not trying to use repressive means over what is really not the problem, what's causing what we are witnessing in our country.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to have to leave it there for now, wrapping up that discussion with Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia spokesperson there, Sharon Ekambaram, speaking to us about what are some of the expectations ahead of the march that is set to take place, the anti-xenophobia march at 9 o'clock. Let's now